Hello and welcome to Library Class. This week we're going to take a look at fairy tales. Now fairy tales can be easy to recognise, but they can also be kind of tricky to define. We know that they are short stories that include magical or wondrous elements. They might include fairies, they might not. It's possible they might include princes and princesses, witches, forests and talking animals. And it's probable that they'll include fantastical luck or amazing deeds. They will also probably, although not always, feature a happy ending. While some fairy stories have a specific author or creator, for example Hans Christian Andersen, who wrote The Little Mermaid, many are folk tales that have been written down. A folk tale is a story that comes from a particular culture or community and gets passed down orally. That is, told person to person rather than read, from generation to generation. They can spread into other cultures and communities too. Not all folk stories that get written down are fairy tales. They could be myths or epics or some other form of story, but many are. One of the most famous collections of fairy tales was put together by the brothers Grimm. You may have heard of them. Joseph and Wilhelm Grimm
Guten Tag. Hello.
were brothers in the early 19th century, and they were fascinated by language and culture. And this led them to take an interest in the folk and traditional stories of their native country, of Germany. They spoke to people who knew these stories and then wrote them down and published them. A lot of the fairy stories that you and I still enjoy to this day, tales like, The Frog Prince, Hansel and Gretel, Snow White, The Elves and the Shoemaker, Rapunzel, owe a degree of their modern popularity to the fact that they were collected and published by the brothers Grimm in their really successful fairy tale book, which was published about 200 years ago in 1812. One character is particularly popular, and of course I don't need to tell you, it's a story of Aschenputtel, or as you know her. I couldn't find it. Or as you know her better, Cinderella. We're actually going to take a closer look at Cinderella because it's the perfect example of how stories can change and mix together as they're passed from generation to generation and from culture to culture. I imagine the version of Cinderella that you guys know the best goes something like this. Although actually, I'm not sure we have time to read the whole thing. I'm going to try and cram it into about 90 seconds in order to refresh your memories. You ready? Okay, let's go. Okay, Cinderella in 90 seconds. Are you ready? You can do this? Alright, here we go. Once there was a beautiful young girl, whose mother died. Very, very sad, but her father remarried, and oh no, the stepmother is horrible, and the stepmother's daughters are also horrible. And they make Cinderella do lots of work down in the kitchen. She's called Cinderella because she's covered in cinders from the fire. Anyway, one day the local prince, very good looking chap, decides he's going to hold a ball to find somebody to marry. Everybody's very excited, can't wait to go. How lovely! No, not lovely, terrible! Cinderella has to stay home and do the washing up because her stepmother says so. Who should be but a fairy godmother? What's the problem, Cinderella? Oh, boo-hoo, I can't go to the ball. Oh, don't worry about that, says the fairy godmother, waves her wand, changes her rags into a beautiful dress, changes a pumpkin into a carriage, changes some mice into some horses. Wait a minute, says the fairy godmother, my magic wears off at midnight, don't be late. Don't worry, says Cinderella, it won't be a problem. Off she goes, it's a problem. She gets to the ball, sees a handsome prince, oh, he is so good looking, decides to dance, then they fall in love, and then, oh dear, it strikes 12. Bing, 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 bong, bing, bing. Was it 12? Don't know. Anyway, she runs down the steps. As she's running down the steps, she drops her shoe. Oh, look at her, says the prince. She's dropped her shoe. Right, we've got to go and find her. They search everywhere. Everyone tries on the shoe to see if they get to be the one to marry the prince. Oh, the stepsisters try and ram their feet in. It doesn't work. They're not going to be able to marry the prince. But who's this? It's Cinderella. But she puts her foot in the shoe, and my goodness, she fits and they get married to the left. Happily ever after. I think I've heard something. Now that's how you do live action. Take that, Disney. The story of Cinderella is hundreds of years old, but it may contain elements that are thousands of years old. Take a listen to this story, the tale of Rhodopis, which is set in ancient Egypt and was first noted down by the ancient Greek historian Strabo well over 2,000 years ago.
Many years ago in ancient Egypt,
Rhodopis, a Greek slave girl, was bathing in the river when an eagle swooped down and stole her sandal.
Hey, my best sandal!
The eagle flew to Egypt's capital city, where the pharaoh himself was seated outside, and dropped the sandal clean into his lap. The pharaoh, astonished by the strangeness of the event and by the beautiful shape of the sandal, sent men in all directions in the country looking for the woman who wore the sandal. And when Rhodopis was found, she was brought to the capital city. Pharaoh and Rhodopis fell in love, and she became his queen.
Well, I imagine some of that sounded familiar. Is this the source of the famous trying on shoe scene in Cinderella? Well, in this case, trying on a slightly soggy sandal, but you get the idea. Next, we go to China, 1,040 years ago, to listen to the story of Xian. This is a still popular tale, and we've got a sort of shortened version of it here. But I want you to keep your eyes and ears open for more familiar Cinderella ingredients. And while you're doing that, you can enjoy the paintings by the artist Stephanie Law, who illustrates this tale.
Once upon a time, there was a young woman called Xian. She was a daughter of a tribal leader, but he had died leaving her in the care of his second wife, a cruel, mean woman, who made Xian do endless, horrible chores. One day, while collecting water from the river, Xian meets and befriends a magical fish with golden scales and eyes. The fish is really the spirit of her long-dead mother who has come to help her. Before long, however, her stepsister, who is equally as mean as the stepmother, follows Xian and sees her talking to the fish. The stepsister tells the wicked stepmother, who wastes no time in disguising herself as Xian, killing the fish and serving it up for supper for her and her daughter. Charming. But don't panic. All is not yet lost. Xian is told by the ghost of an ancestor to bury the bones of the fish in 4 separate pots and to place each of the pots by the 4 corners of her bed. The ghost tells her that if she does this, all her wishes will be granted. Now, this was the time of the New Year festival, when many couples would meet and agree to marry. The stepmother doesn't want to spoil her daughter's chances of finding a husband, and so orders Xian to stay home while they go to the festival. While they are at the festival, however, Xian is visited by the fish's spirit. She makes a silent wish and finds herself dressed in a beautiful silk dress, a cloak of kingfisher feathers, and a pair of tiny golden slippers, which the fish warns her not to lose. Xian goes to the New Year festival, and all are amazed by her beauty and grace and mistake her for a princess. But she becomes worried that her stepfamily recognize her, and so flees the party, leaving, you guessed it, one of her golden slippers. I'm sure you can also guess the rest. The golden slipper finds its way into the hands of the local king, who, impressed by its beauty and elegance, searches the kingdom for the woman whose foot it fits. Once he finds Xian and her foot, they are married, much to the fury of her stepfamily.
Well, I imagine you spotted some additional ingredients there. We've got the trying on the shoe scene, but we also have the beautiful dress, the wicked stepmother, and at least one horrible stepsister. We also have a magical fish, which I was not expecting, so that was a nice surprise. And that introduces the idea of a magical helper. It's not a fairy godmother, but it's not that dissimilar. Actually, the fairy godmother doesn't even feature in the Brothers Grimm version, nor do we have a pumpkin there. But what we do have is a scene where the stepsisters cut bits off their own feet to try and put them into Cinderella's shoe. Thanks for that, Grimm Brothers.
You're welcome. Ah, it's my favorite bit.
The fairy godmother and pumpkin elements actually come from a version of the story written by the French writer Charles Perrault in 1697, so that's about 100 years before the Grimm brothers. He not only had a fairy godmother and a pumpkin, but he also introduced the idea of Cinderella's shoes being glass slippers. This is the version that Walt Disney based their famous cartoon version on in 1950, about 350 years later. That's probably the version that you and I know the best. It fascinates me how many versions of Cinderella there are out there. It's true of many of the stories and tales that we know and love, and we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. But in the meantime, if you're still hungry for different versions of Cinderella, you might be excited to learn that the academic Marion Rolfe Cox once published a book called 345 variants of Cinderella, abstracted and tabulated with the discussion of medieval analogues and notes. So, for your homework, nah, just kidding, or am I? No, I am just kidding. You don't have to read that. I thought it could be pretty interesting, right? Anyway, that's the end of library class. So, keep discovering, keep exploring. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.